Kyle Hayes fired me on my wedding day. He even called it a gift. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I smiled, danced with my husband, and let the calls from his father pile up until he was the one desperate for my help. That was the day I learned silence could be the sharpest weapon of all. And believe me, this story was only getting started. Before I tell you how I turned my firing into their downfall, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated until you made them regret it? Now, let me take you back to the moment. I stood there in my wedding dress, holding my phone, and realized the message that should have ruined me was the one that set me free. I used to believe nothing could ruin a wedding day. I was wrong. I was still holding my bouquet when the text came through. My phone buzzed once, twice, then stopped. I glanced down, smiling, expecting a sweet message from Daniel. Instead, I saw 5 words that felt like a blade pressed against my chest. "You're fired. Consider it my gift to you." I froze. For a second, I didn't even breathe. The room around me, the laughter of our guests in the reception hall, the faint scent of roses, the distant clinking of champagne glasses, faded into a blur. All I could see was Kyle Hayes' name glowing on my screen. Kyle, my boss's son. The man who'd spent months making my job unbearable, who smiled like he owned every room he walked into. He'd chosen this day, my day, to end my career with a single casual swipe of his thumb. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there, still in my dress, staring at those words until they burned into my vision. Daniel found me in the vestibule, away from the music and the crowd. He didn't look surprised. That was the part that unsettled me most. While I was still trembling, he simply reached for my hand, steady and calm, and kissed my knuckles like it was the easiest thing in the world. "Check your messages later," he whispered. "Today belongs to us." I should have argued. I should have told him I just lost everything I'd worked for. My role as lead project manager at Hayes Architecture, the position I'd built from scratch. But there was something in his eyes, quiet and unshakable, that made me stop. He wasn't dismissing me. He was asking me to trust him. So I silenced my phone. I tucked it into my maid of honor's purse. And for a few hours, I tried to believe him. We walked through the grand doors of the church, stepping into a shower of rose petals and applause. I smiled. I danced. I let myself pretend for just long enough that I could deal with Kyle tomorrow. But deep down, I knew the war had already started. 3 hours later, as Daniel and I swayed to our first dance, Nima, my maid of honor, rushed toward me, panic etched into her face. "Lauren, your phone. It won't stop buzzing. You have 108 missed calls." My stomach dropped. I stepped off the dance floor, my heels clicking against the polished wood, and opened my phone. Dozens of calls from the office, even more from my co-workers, and 17 from a number I recognized instantly. Richard, Hayes, Kyle's father, the man who'd once told me I was the best investment this company ever made. That was when I realized this wasn't just a firing. This was bigger, much bigger. I ducked into a quiet corner, hands trembling, and played the first voicemail. Richard's voice, sharp but desperate, filled my ear. "Lauren, call me back immediately. Kyle had no authority to do this. There's been a mistake. We need you. No one can access the project system. Please, before Monday, call me." 6 more messages followed, each one worse than the last. By the final one, his voice cracked. "Lauren, please. The downtown project is dead in the water. We can't find the updated renderings. We can't even log into your system. I'll fix this. Just please call me." I stared at my phone, my heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. For the first time since Kyle's text, I didn't feel powerless. I felt something else entirely. Power. For 2 years, I'd built a project management system so intricate, so seamless that I could run it in my sleep. But without me, no one else could. Training sessions, canceled by Kyle. Documentation, blocked by Kyle. He'd wanted to shut me out, to erase my influence. Instead, he'd made himself completely dependent on me. And now, on the day he thought he'd humiliate me, he'd handed me every advantage. Daniel found me standing there, staring at my phone like it was no longer a weapon aimed at me, but one I was holding myself. He didn't ask what I was thinking. He didn't have to. He just stood close enough for me to feel his calm. "I should tell you something," he said softly. "Kyle's been altering plans, removing safety features, cutting corners. I've been documenting everything." I looked at him sharply. "You knew," he nodded. "I was going to report it next week. But now, Kyle had done me the greatest favor of all. He'd fired me. He'd shoved me out of the line of legal fire just in time for me to watch him burn. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to dance again. Not because it was my wedding day, but because for the first time in months, I wasn't the one trapped." "What should we do?" I asked him. Daniel's answer was simple. "Nothing. Not tonight. Tonight we dance. Tomorrow, we make them regret ever underestimating you." And for once, I didn't argue. I put my phone away. I let Daniel pull me back onto the dance floor. And when I smiled this time, it wasn't just for the wedding photos. It was because I already knew. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. But as I looked around that room, the laughter, the music, the warmth of our friends and family, I couldn't shake one thought. Somewhere in that glass tower of an office, Kyle Hayes had no idea the storm he'd just unleashed. Richard Hayes hadn't even seen the worst of it yet, because when I returned his call, nothing in that company would ever be the same again. The morning after my wedding felt like standing in the quiet before a storm. Daniel was still asleep, his arm draped across me, warm and steady. For one blissful moment, I let myself believe it had all been a dream. But then my phone lit up again. Dozens of missed calls, new voicemails stacked on top of last night's unanswered ones. And at the very top, Richard Hayes' name flashing like an alarm bell. I slipped out of bed, padded, barefoot to the balcony, and listened. "Lauren, it's Richard." Kyle overstepped. "He doesn't have that authority. Please call me back. We're at a standstill." Another message. "Lauren, we'll make this right. Triple your salary. Just help us unlock the system." By the third one, his voice wasn't just urgent, it was panicked. "If we don't fix this before Monday, the downtown project is dead. Clients are threatening to walk. Lauren, please." I leaned against the railing, staring out at the pale morning sky, and realized something. Richard wasn't just calling me as a boss. He was calling me like a man drowning, reaching for the only hand that could save him, and that hand was mine. Daniel joined me quietly, pressing a coffee cup into my hand like he already knew what I'd heard. He didn't ask what I was going to do. He just sipped his own coffee and said, "You know, you don't have to pick up. Not yet." I looked at him, at the calm in his eyes, and wondered how he could be so sure. "Because," he added, almost reading my thoughts, "they need you more than you've ever needed them." He was right. For the first time, I wasn't the one chasing their approval. Richard Hayes, a man who used to stride through the office like he owned every breath we took, was now begging. And Kyle. Oh, I could picture him pacing his father's office, trying to explain how firing me wasn't a disaster but a masterstroke. I almost laughed at the thought. But before I could say anything, my phone buzzed again. This time, not a voicemail. A text. From Kyle. "Hope you're enjoying unemployment. Should have stayed in your lane." Daniel glanced at the screen and shook his head. He's desperate. When people lash out like that, it's because they can feel the ground slipping out from under them. I didn't reply. Not yet. There are some battles you win in silence. By noon, I had 12 more missed calls, 2 from Richard, 1 from HR, and unexpectedly, 1 from Brittany Collins Brittany, who used to be my assistant, the one I mentored, the one who'd smiled sweetly while taking every bit of advice I offered like it was gospel. "Lauren, it's Brittany. I'm not supposed to say this, but things are bad here. Nobody can find the project files. Kyle's locked himself in his office. Richard's furious. They need you. If you don't call back, I don't know what's going to happen." Her voice cracked on the last word. That was almost satisfying. Almost, but I wasn't ready to be their savior. Not yet. Instead, I turned to Daniel. If I go back now, they'll just drag me into the mess. I need them to see what happens without me. I need them to feel it. He smiled. Not the kind of smile you give when you're amused, but the kind you give when someone has finally decided to stop playing small. Then let them sweat, he said. And so I did. That evening, I played Richard's messages again. I let each one wash over me like proof of how far I'd come. I thought about the nights I'd stayed in the office until midnight, perfecting a system that made their jobs easier. About every meeting where Kyle had cut me off, smirking like I didn't belong in the same room. Now he couldn't take a single step without me. I didn't call Richard back. Not that night. Not the next morning either. By the third day, the calls didn't stop. They only multiplied. Lauren, I'll double your salary. No, triple. Partial ownership if you want it. Lauren, please, the engineers are threatening to walk. The city's asking questions. We can't. And then, the message that made me laugh out loud. Lauren, if you come back now, I'll personally remove Kyle from the project. Even Richard Hayes, the man who'd once called his son the future of the firm, was ready to sacrifice him. But I wasn't ready to pick up, because this wasn't about money. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about making them understand that I wasn't disposable. I was the system. And until they truly grasped that, I wasn't going to give them a lifeline. Daniel and I sat on the couch that night, the glow of the city lights spilling into our living room. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His hand was warm over mine, steady, grounding. What are you thinking? He asked finally. I stared at my phone, at the endless stream of missed calls, and said, I'm thinking they're about to learn exactly what happens when you fire me on my wedding day. Because if Richard Hayes thought this was bad, he hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. And neither had Kyle. Brittany's voicemail wasn't the last time I'd hear her voice. But next time, it wouldn't be a plea. It would be a betrayal. Because by the end of that week, I'd find out just how far Kyle was willing to go and who was going to help him. By the end of that week, I thought I'd seen every way Hayes architecture could implode. I was wrong. The first sign came through an email, one I wasn't supposed to see. It wasn't from Richard or Kyle. It was from Brittany Collins. My Brittany. The assistant I'd trained, mentored, defended in meetings when Kyle dismissed her as too green. I'd expected a quiet message of support, maybe even an apology for staying in that toxic office. Instead, I stared at the subject line, my chest tightening. System transition plan. Confidential. And there it was. Brittany's name, right next. To Kyle's. She wasn't warning me. She was helping him replace me. I read every line, each word slicing a little deeper. Kyle had promised her a temporary promotion if she helped him rewrite my system from scratch. She'd already scheduled meetings with IT. She was even rewriting my training documentation, stripping my name from every single contribution I'd made. I sat back, phone trembling in my hand. The betrayal was sharp, but not unfamiliar. I'd been here before, watching someone I'd believed in choose survival over loyalty. Daniel came up behind me, resting, a hand on my shoulder. What is it? I turned the screen toward him. He didn't even look surprised. She's with him, I said flatly. Daniel studied the email for a long moment, then looked at me with a quiet certainty that almost felt unfair. This isn't over. People like Brittany, they climb fast, but they fall even faster. Maybe he was right. But all I could feel in that moment was anger, not the sharp, explosive kind. No, this was quieter, heavier. The kind of anger that sits in your chest and waits for the right moment to be used. I didn't call Richard, I didn't call Brittany, but I did watch. By Monday, the chaos inside Hayes architecture was spilling out into the industry. Word was getting around, clients whispering about unexplained delays, engineers threatening to walk unless the project files were restored. Richard was begging anyone who would listen for help, And then Brittany made her move. I got the call from a former coworker. She's strutting around the office like she runs the place, they told me. Kyle announced her as interim project lead this morning. I almost laughed. Interim project lead? The same Brittany who once asked me how to attach a permit file to an email? I could picture Kyle's smug grin, Richard's clenched jaw, and Brittany's fake, wide-eyed humility as she accepted the title. But what none of them understood was this. My system wasn't just a program. It was me. Every shortcut, every hidden safeguard, every backup was built from the ground up by my hands, and without me, it was a locked vault. By midweek, the fallout started. A city inspector flagged their downtown project for missing compliance files. Engineers walked out of meetings because the blueprints were outdated. And through it all, Brittany kept smiling, parroting Kyle's excuses, pretending they weren't teetering on the edge of disaster. Daniel and I sat in our living room that night, watching the storm from a distance. He handed me a glass of wine, his lips curving into that quiet, knowing smile I was starting to depend on. Let them keep digging, he said. When the ground gives way, they'll have no one left to call. But you... He was right. But I couldn't shake the sting of Brittany's betrayal. I'd seen Kyle coming. But her? I'd believed in her. I opened her email again. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remember how it felt. The coldness in those words. The way she'd signed her name at the bottom like it didn't mean anything to throw me aside. Fine. If Brittany Collins wanted to play on Kyle Hayes' team, she could go down with him. 2 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 6 words. It's falling apart. He's blaming me. Brittany. I stared at the message, then at Daniel, who raised an eyebrow. She's cracking, he said simply. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because I'd learned something in those long nights of silence. While Richard begged for my help, timing is everything. You don't win by striking first. You win by waiting until the other side has nowhere left to run. And Brittany? She was running out of road. By Friday, the calls from Richard had gone from desperate to downright pitiful. He wasn't just offering me my job back. He was offering a blank check, ownership, authority, anything. But I didn't say yes. Not yet. Because there was one more thing I needed to see, and I saw it the very next morning. A forwarded email, leaked from inside Hayes Architecture. Kyle, screaming, digitally, anyway, at Brittany for failing to deliver on the downtown project. He'd CC'd half the executive team. And Brittany? She hadn't even tried to defend herself. I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew. I didn't need to destroy them. They were already doing it for me. But I hadn't counted on one thing. Richard Hayes wasn't just going to watch his empire burn. Because the next time my phone rang, it wasn't begging. It was a deal I never saw coming. When Richard Hayes' number lit up my phone again, I almost didn't answer. I expected another round of pleading, another desperate promise he couldn't possibly keep. But this time, there was something different in his voice. Lauren, he said, low and deliberate, name your price. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just stared out the window. The city stretched out beneath me and let those words settle in. 2 weeks ago, this man had let his son fire me on my wedding day. Now he was offering me the keys to his empire. And I wasn't even tempted. Because for the first time, I understood the power of silence. Every day I'd stayed quiet. Richard's calls had grown more frantic. Every hour I hadn't answered. Kyle's mistakes had multiplied. And now the entire company was bent around a single fact. Without me, they couldn't move. I'm on my honeymoon, Richard, I said finally, my voice calm, even. I'll think about it when I'm back. He sputtered, but I didn't wait for him to respond. I hung up and turned back to Daniel, who was leaning in the doorway with that quiet, unwavering smile of his. You didn't even negotiate, he said. I don't need to, I replied. They're already negotiating with themselves. And he laughed, soft and low, like he'd known all along that this was exactly how it would play out. For the next week, we stayed in Beast, drinking coffee on the balcony every morning and ignoring the dozens, no hundreds of calls piling up, on my phone. Every time it buzzed, I looked at Daniel, and he'd simply shake his head. Not yet. By the third day, Richard's voicemails had shifted. They weren't just offers anymore. They were confessions. "Lauren," one began, his voice rough and weary. "You built something I didn't understand, and I let Kyle tear it down. That was a mistake. The biggest mistake of my career. I'll make this right, whatever it takes." And maybe, for just a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the text Kyle had sent me. "Hope you're enjoying unemployment." And any trace of sympathy burned away. Instead of going back, I made a choice that even surprised me. I opened my laptop and drafted the first outline for Precision Protocol Consulting. My company. My rules. Daniel leaned over my shoulder, reading, in silence. When I was done, he nodded like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You're not going back, are you?" he asked. I looked at him, at the man who'd stood beside me while everything else fell apart, and said, "No, I'm not." The moment I hit register on my business license, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just walking away from Hayes Architecture, I was walking toward something bigger. When the news hit the business registry, I didn't have to wait long for the reaction. My phone rang within an hour. Richard Hayes again. "Lauren, listen," he said, his words sharp with urgency. "We'll hire your firm. Whatever you're charging, we'll pay it." I let the silence stretch until it felt like he might break. Then I said, "You'll be my first client, after the city." He froze. "The city?" "That's right," I told him. "I'm starting with compliance consulting. My first contract is with the department that signs off on every project you'll ever submit. I'm going to build the protocols you should have had in the first place." He didn't speak for a long time. I could hear it in the silence. The way he finally understood just how deep this was about to cut. But I didn't give him room to recover. "And Richard," I added, "you might want to talk to your son. Because the minute my system goes live, the city's going to start looking at every submission, including the ones Kyle altered." A sharp inhale, and then, for the first time, Richard Hayes didn't sound like a titan of industry. He just sounded tired. "Lauren, don't do this." "Oh, Richard," I said almost gently, "I'm not doing anything. You and Kyle already did." When I hung up, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt steady, like I'd been waiting for this exact moment without even realizing it. That night, Daniel and I walked along the beach. He didn't ask what I planned to do next. He didn't need to. He knew. "Tomorrow," I told him. "Staring out at the waves, we go home, and then we watch them fall apart." But what I didn't know then was that Kyle wasn't the only one I'd be dealing with. Because somewhere inside Hayes Architecture, Brittany Collins was still smiling, and she was about to learn the one lesson Kyle never had. You don't fire me and walk away untouched. Brittany thought she was safe in Kyle's shadow. She was wrong. Because the next time I walked into that office, I wouldn't be an employee. I'd be the one holding the contract. When I walked back into the city office with Daniel by my side, I wasn't the same woman who'd left Hayes Architecture. Humiliated, I wasn't the employee begging for approval anymore. I was here on my terms, holding a brand new consulting contract with the department that signed off on every construction project in the city. And that's when Daniel slid a thin folder across my desk. "You're going to want to see this," he said. I opened it, and my breath caught. Blueprints, dozens of them, all tied to Hayes Architecture, and every single one had the same problem. Safety features stripped away, load-bearing specs altered, cheaper materials swapped in at the last minute, and at the center of it all, one signature appeared again and again. Kevin Dawson, a city official, the man responsible for approvals. Daniel's voice was calm, but I could hear the anger buried underneath. Kevin's been fast-tracking Kyle's plans. He's been signing off on everything without review. I've been documenting it for months. I stared down at the papers, feeling the weight of what this meant. This wasn't just corporate sabotage anymore. This was corruption. Dangerous, reckless corruption. and Kyle wasn't clever enough to pull it off alone. I closed the folder slowly. If this is true, I said, they're not just going to lose their company, they're going to lose everything. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew what came next. While the city's lawyers prepared to investigate Kevin, I turned my focus back to Hayes architecture. I didn't need to confront Kyle directly, not yet. Because the beauty of power is that sometimes you don't have to swing the hammer yourself. You just step back and let the weight of what's coming crush them. And by midweek, the cracks were already showing. Richard called me again, his voice hoarse. Lauren, listen to me, we can fix this. He's made mistakes, but we can get ahead of this if you just... I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because at that exact moment, the city's compliance office, my office now, sent Hayes Architecture a formal notice. Pending review of all active submissions. I could almost picture Kyle reading that email, his smirk vanishing. But while Kyle panicked, Brittany doubled down. She sent me a message that night as if nothing had happened between us. You're really going to do this? After everything I did for you? I stared at the screen, stunned for a moment. And then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because Brittany had no idea how obvious she'd made herself. She'd betrayed me, sided with Kyle, and now that the walls were closing in, she wanted sympathy. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded her message to Daniel. He just smiled. She's starting to sweat. The next morning, Kevin Dawson's name hit the headlines. City official under investigation for bribery and code violations. And just like that, Kyle's world went from unstable to free fall. Every project Kevin had approved was frozen. Investors were furious. Clients were demanding answers. And in the middle of it all, I sat at my desk, coffee in hand, watching it unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who didn't need revenge to be loud for it to be devastating. Richard left me 3 more voicemails that day. His voice didn't sound angry anymore. It sounded tired. Lauren, please. I don't know how we got here, but I need you. I'll sign anything. Just tell me what you want. What I wanted was simple. I wanted them to see what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. That night, Daniel and I sat in our kitchen, papers spread across the table. He traced a finger across one blueprint and smiled faintly. You know, he said, I don't think this is about Kyle anymore. This is bigger than him. He was right. This wasn't just about Kyle or Brittany or even Richard. This was about a system that had been broken for so long that no one questioned it. Until I did. I leaned back in my chair and looked at Daniel. Then let's fix it. And that was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to take back what they'd stolen from me. I was going to build something better than any of them ever imagined. But first, I was going to watch Kyle Hayes fall. Richard Hayes wasn't finished yet, and his next move would change everything, because the call I got the next morning wasn't a plea, it was an offer. When the call came in, I almost didn't pick up. I'd gotten so used to Richard Hayes' desperate voicemails that I assumed this was just another. But the moment I heard his voice, I knew something was different. Lauren, he said, quiet but steady, I'm not calling to beg. I'm calling with an offer. I froze. Richard Hayes wasn't the kind of man who offered anything. He took, he demanded, he expected. But now his tone carried something I'd never heard from him before. Surrender. Go on, I said. Come back. Not as an employee, as a consultant. We'll pay whatever you ask. We'll remove Kyle from the downtown project. And we'll give you full control of the system you built. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked across the table at Daniel. He didn't say anything, but his expression was clear. You're holding all the cards now. Richard, I said finally, you're offering to pay me to fix the mess your son made? There was a pause. Yes. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because I could hear the sound of an empire cracking. I'll think about it, I told him, and hung up. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You're going to make him wait? Oh, I said, swirling the coffee in my cup. I'm going to make him sweat. By noon, the city issued an official suspension notice on every single Hayes architecture project connected to Kevin Dawson. The news spread fast, and by evening, the industry was buzzing. And Kyle, he didn't even try to hide his panic anymore. Former colleague called me, barely able to contain her laughter. "Lauren, he's tearing through the office like a hurricane. He even screamed at Brittany in front of everyone. She's threatening to quit." I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But Brittany had chosen her side. Now she could live with it. 2 days later, I walked into City Hall. Not for Hayes, not for Richard, but for me. My first official meeting as the owner of Precision Protocol Consulting. I was there to finalize a compliance contract that would make me the gatekeeper for every major project in the city. And as I left the meeting, my phone rang. Richard again. "Lauren," he said, "I'll triple your fee if you come in today." I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to know I was in no hurry. Then I said, "I'll come in tomorrow. And Richard?" "Yes? I want Kyle there." There was a pause, and when Richard spoke again, his voice was tight. "Fine." When I walked into Hayes Architecture the next morning, the entire office went silent. People who'd once avoided meeting my gaze were suddenly watching me like I was untouchable. And there he was. "Kyle." He didn't smirk this time. He didn't even look at me. Richard was waiting in the conference room, pale and drawn, a man who'd been forced to swallow his pride piece by piece. He slid a contract across the table. "Consulting," he said. "Full authority, no interference." I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I turned to Kyle. "You'll stay out of my way," I told him. He opened his mouth, but Richard cut him off with a sharp look. "He will," Richard said. And just like that, Kyle Hayes was silent. By the end of the day, I had everything I wanted. My contract was signed. My authority was absolute. And for the first time, Hayes Architecture wasn't my prison. It was my stage. That night, Richard called me one more time, his voice quieter than ever. "Lauren, thank you. I know I don't deserve it, but..." I stopped him. "This isn't for you," I said. "This is for me." And it was. But what I didn't tell him was that I had no intention of simply fixing his mess. I was going to rebuild the rules entirely, on my terms. Because if Richard Hayes thought this was a rescue mission, he was wrong. This was a takeover. Kyle didn't fight me that day, but the way he looked at me, it wasn't anger anymore. It was something else, and I didn't know it then, but the man who fired me on my wedding day was about to become my first unexpected ally. When I returned to Hayes Architecture the next morning, the office didn't feel like the same place I'd left. For the first time, no one looked at me with pity or whispered behind my back. They watched me with a mixture of curiosity and fear, like they knew the balance of power had shifted and weren't sure which side of it they were standing on. Richard was waiting in the main conference room. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched, his face lined with exhaustion. And beside him, Kyle sat stiffly, jaw clenched, hands folded in a way that almost looked disciplined. "Lauren," Richard greeted me, voice low but steady, "we're ready to finalize your role." He slid another contract across the table. I glanced at it but didn't pick it up right away. Instead, I let my eyes move to Kyle. He wouldn't look at me, not until Richard spoke again. "Kyle will be removed from management, effective immediately." That made Kyle flinch. His father didn't even glance at him. "Instead," Richard continued, "he'll work under you. He'll learn your system. He'll complete every single training module you assign." I studied Kyle for a long moment. The arrogance I remembered was gone. In its place was something quieter, shame maybe, or acceptance. Finally, I said, "If he wants to learn, I'll teach him. But if he pushes back even once, I walk." Richard nodded without hesitation. "He won't." And for the first time, Kyle spoke. His voice was rough, but steady. "I won't." I didn't believe him. Not yet, but I signed the contract anyway. From that day forward, Hayes Architecture was no longer my enemy. They were my project. And Kyle Hayes was my first assignment. The transformation wasn't immediate. Kyle didn't suddenly become humble or eager. At first, he was quiet, almost mechanical. He showed up early, completed every module I gave him, and didn't argue. But there were cracks in the facade. One afternoon, while reviewing compliance reports, I caught him staying late in the office, going line by line through every detail. He didn't notice me watching. For a second, he didn't look like the man who'd fired me on my wedding day. He just looked determined. And maybe, against my better judgment, I respected that. Meanwhile, Brittany wasn't taking her fall nearly as gracefully. She'd been stripped of her interim project lead title within hours of my return, and now she lingered around the office like a ghost, glaring at me from doorways and slamming folders a little too loudly. One afternoon, she cornered me in the hallway. "You really think you've won, don't you?" she hissed. I didn't even stop walking. "No," I said calmly. "I don't think I've won. I know I have." The look on her face was almost enough to make up for everything. Almost. By the end of the week, I'd implemented a triple verification process that forced every single project, especially anything Kyle touched, through my team. Richard didn't protest. Kyle didn't argue. Even Brittany didn't dare push back. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving Hayes architecture, I was reshaping it. But the real surprise came the following Monday. Kyle knocked on my office door. He didn't smirk, he didn't swagger, he just stood there, holding a file. "I found an error in one of the old submissions," he said. The kind of thing I wouldn't have caught before. I took the file from him. He wasn't wrong. For a moment, I almost saw what Richard must have once hoped for in him. Not the spoiled son who'd coasted on his father's name, but someone who could actually do the work. And maybe that's why, for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel anger when I looked at Kyle. I felt something else. Satisfaction, because making him my enemy had been easy, but turning him into proof of my victory, that was better. Still, I didn't forget who he'd been as I handed the file back. To him, I said quietly, "You're not forgiven. Not yet." Kyle met my eyes and nodded. "I know. I'll earn it." Maybe he would. Maybe he wouldn't. But for now, that was enough. Later that night, as I left the office, Richard stopped me in the lobby. He didn't look like a man who'd been forced into a deal. He looked almost relieved. "You've changed this place already," he said. "No," I corrected him. "I'm not done changing it. Because this wasn't just about Hayes architecture anymore. Something bigger was coming, whether they were ready or not. And when it arrived, it would force all of us, Kyle included, to choose exactly what kind of people we wanted to be." It happened on a quiet morning. The kind of morning where the office hums with quiet focus, papers rustling, keyboards tapping. A rhythm I'd once dreaded but now controlled. Kyle stood across from me at the project table, reviewing compliance reports like a man who had something to prove. Richard hovered nearby, no longer the towering figure of authority he used to be, but a man who seemed strangely lighter. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider in this building. I felt like the architect of its future. And that's when the news broke. The city formally announced the reassignment of the downtown revitalization project. Only had Hayes Architecture survived the fallout of Kyle's mistakes. It had been awarded the contract back, with my firm, Precision Protocol Consulting, named as its compliance partner. The office erupted in applause. For them, it was relief. For me, it was vindication. Kyle approached my desk later that day, holding a file I didn't ask for. "I went through the last set of specs," he said quietly. "I triple-checked everything. I wanted you to see it." He placed the file down, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who'd once texted, "Consider it my gift to you" on my wedding day. I saw someone else entirely. "You're learning," I said, keeping my voice even. He didn't look away. "I'm trying." And the strangest part? I believed him. As the weeks passed, I watched him change in ways I hadn't expected. The arrogance was gone. He stayed late, asked questions he would have once mocked, and most shocking of all, he listened. Not just to me, but to the team he used to ignore. Even Brittany, after her inevitable demotion, stopped fighting. She lingered at her desk, quieter now, as if she'd finally realized there was no shortcut left to take. And through it all, Richard held true to his word. Every process I demanded was implemented. Every safeguard I designed was enforced. Hayes architecture wasn't just surviving, it was transforming. One evening, after the office had emptied out, I stayed late to review the downtown project timeline. That's when I noticed Kyle lingering by the window, staring down at the city like he was trying to figure out where he fit in it. "Why did you fire me?" "That day?" I asked suddenly. He didn't turn. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke, his voice low. "Because you were right about everything. About the training, about the protocols, about me." He turned then, and his expression wasn't defiant. It was honest. "I thought if I could hurt you, I'd feel like I had some kind of control. But all I did was burn everything down around me. And He stopped himself, swallowed hard. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm trying to be better than the guy who sent that text." I studied him for a long moment. The old me would have wanted an apology, a grand gesture, some dramatic confession. But now I didn't need it. "Then prove it," I said. He nodded. "I will." And for once, I believed him. Months passed, and the downtown project moved faster than anyone expected. Every inspection passed. Every audit came back clean. The partnership between Precision Protocol Consulting and Hayes Architecture became the standard other firms wanted to copy. The industry press called it a new model of accountability. But I didn't care about the headlines. What mattered was that I'd rewritten the rules, on my terms. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, I got a text from Kyle. "Thank you for the promotion approval. I won't let you down." I stared at it for a long moment before typing back, "Make sure you don't. Some gifts can't be returned." When I hit send, I realized it was exactly 1 year to the day since the text he'd sent me on my wedding day. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Neither was the fact that I wasn't angry anymore. Because this wasn't revenge. Not really. This was better. I didn't destroy Kyle. I rebuilt the ground he stood on and made him learn to climb it the hard way. I didn't just survive Hayes architecture. I turned it into something stronger. And in the process, I proved something to myself. True. Power isn't about burning everything down. It's about standing over the ashes and choosing what to build next. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reconstruction. And I had no intention of stopping here. Because if I could turn my worst day into this, what do you think I could do next? When I walked out of that office for the last time that night, I didn't feel triumphant the way I thought I would. I didn't feel like I'd won. It was quieter than that. For months, I'd carried the weight of anger, the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of that text message on my wedding day. But standing there in the cool night air, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need to be, because I had rebuilt everything they tried to take from me, not out of spite, but because I refused to stay small. And maybe that's what real justice feels like. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, unshakable. I looked back at the building once, just once, and I almost smiled. Not for Richard, not for Kyle, for me, for the woman who didn't shatter, who turned the worst day of her life into the reason she'll never be underestimated again. And if you've ever been pushed aside, made to feel invisible, I hope you hear this. You are not powerless. You just haven't had your moment yet. Tell me in the comments, have you ever turned something that should have broken you into the very thing that set you free? Because that's what this was. And maybe it's only the beginning. I don't know where this path will lead next, but for the first time, I'm not afraid of the next step. I'm ready for it. And that's a different kind of victory, the kind no one can take away.